I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Jenni Baker. Prepare to rummage through the lost and found in the great concavity.
Yeah, lost and found. That's great. Awesome, Jenni. Thank you so much for your introduction, and thanks for coming on the Great Concavity. This is episode 9. Can you believe that, Matt?
Wow.
We're almost at 10. That's gone by pretty fast.
Episode 9.
So we're joined this week by Jenni Baker. Jenni Baker is the editor-in-chief of the Found Poetry Review magazine and the mastermind behind the Erasing Infinite project. Welcome to the show, Jenni. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Welcome.
So, Jenni, tell us a bit about what you do with David Foster Wallace with his work and maybe some stuff about the poetry review that you're involved with. And then we'll just get a sense of sort of your background and then how you sort of came to Infinite Jest and to Wallace.
Sure. So at a high level, I manage the Erasing Infinite project, which is online at erasinginfinite.com. And what I do is I take David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, scan it in page by page on my scanner, and then work page by page erasing words from those pages until I arrive at a poem. So this is commonly called erasure poetry, exactly for the practice that it deploys.
Mm-hmm. And how long ago did you start that? When did you start that project?
So I started the project back in 2013, sort of late in the fall. Originally, I had, this grand vision that I would work on one poem every day so that, I would be done with this thing in 3 years. I think I managed the poem a day rate for, a couple months. And then I realized, I think when you're
not sustainable,
definitely not sustainable, not with a day job and then, somewhat of a life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I probably turn out about, 3 or 4 poems a week, on a good week.
That's good.
Doing the math is really scary. I think I'm probably going to be doing this for 10 more years.
Oh my God.
But we'll see.
And then the Pale King next.
Maybe, if I'm feeling ambitious.
Yeah.
I saw today you posted that you're 25% of the way done, though.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's really good timing. I try to celebrate the milestones where they come because they're very few in a book of this scope. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a Sisyphusian enterprise to just roll the ball up the hill forever.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you plan to do with it when it is complete? Is it just something that's going to live online? Or what do you envision the whole long-term life of the project looking like?
So I have several ideas, and I need other people to kind of come into play to make these a reality. But I would love, obviously, to publish this as a big collection.
Oh yeah. As a 1,000-page book.
Exactly. So not every publisher is gonna want to take that on. I could also see, maybe trying to convince a publisher to publish it in fourths or publish it in halves or something like that to make it a little bit more manageable.
Right.
Something else that I'd really love to do is kind of turn these digital poems into prints. And, kind of work with museums or libraries, maybe even kind of like the Ransom Center and try to do kind of a display or exhibit, of some of the prints.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. So the poems that you end up with after you've erased a page of Infinite Jest tend to be quite short, usually around 10 to 15 words or so, would you say?
Yep, that's about right.
That's about where it lands. Do you have a couple examples that you could read for us right now so people can get a sense of what your poetry looks like?
Oh gosh, I could. I'd have to pull it up here
to put you on the spot and everything, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I can read 2 of these pieces for you. Again, because they are so short, I think they lend themselves more to kind of a visual looking at and reading than an audio reading. But for our audience purposes, I will do that. So I'll read the first one, and this is from the beginning page of the book titled "Year of Glad," and I've turned that into a piece that's called "Egad," and it goes: "Hope is at the periphery of my focus, more or less, where you reside."
Cool. So that's Hal sitting in the University of Arizona department in front of the deans?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So
cool.
so one of the challenges that I face is, I'm so kind of married to this text and the plot and what happens. And, really part of the challenge is to create poems that are not just poems about infinite jest, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask, like, thematically, are you trying to recreate a sense of what's happening on that page, like almost as sort of a synopsis or like a poetic capturing of the feeling or the mood or the tone of what's happening? Or are they just meant to be totally independent of that?
I try to make them as independent as possible. I think part of the criticism of this kind of poetry, when people do have it, is that, you're just kind of taking prose and making a poetic version of that. So, I really try to not iterate, the plot again in the poem. But it's hard. It's hard because, I think you're kind of captured by like the mood and the spirit and the words, that Wallace has chose to use. So it's a little inevitable at points that creeps in. Right.
So for first-time readers in Infinite Jest, they can approach your work without fear of spoilers, would you say?
Yeah, correct. No spoilers.
All right, that's good. How did you get into this erasure poetry genre specifically? What's your background there with that?
So I've always been a writer, more of a kind of traditional writer. I started writing poetry probably in about 2007, 2008, I would say, and I faced the challenge that I think every poet or every writer faces, where you're sitting down, you've got this blank screen or this blank piece of paper, and you're supposed to magically summon these words right out of nowhere and put them on the paper, and they're supposed to be just wonderful and great. And one of the exercises that I turned to when I was facing this long period of writer's block was this practice of found poetry or erasure poetry, where, you start with words that somebody else has written. And that could be in a book, that could be a label on a soup can, right? Anything, basically. It could be your source text.
Right.
Kind of starting with somebody else's words and thinking about how to re-envision them and rework them can be, an effective strategy for dealing with that writer's block. So, originally it was just kind of an exercise to break myself out of my writing routine. But the more that I did that, the more I really found that I liked it. And, as I was sharing them with other people, they responded very positively to that. So it kind of became a more regular part of my writing practice.
Cool. And it turns out there's a scene for this kind of poetry as well. There's a lot of other people engaged with it.
There are, yeah. It has its roots way, way far back, with the Dadaists and Tristan Zara. And, a lot of those early writers who were kind of experimenting and playing around with work. And we're really seeing a resurgence in, the number of people who are writing this type of work. But B, and more importantly, I've seen publishers become more accepting or tolerant, right, of this type of work.
Yeah, Tree of Codes by Jonathan Safran Foer comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the kind of redacted, deleted text out of Street of Crocodiles. Yeah.
Jenni, let's talk about how you discovered David Foster Wallace. Do you remember that story? How you first came to? Was it Infinite Jest? What was the first thing of his you read? Do you remember?
Yeah, so I was in grad school. This was probably about 2007. I was getting my master's in professional writing at the University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth. And I was taking this stylistics course. And as part of that course, our professor had assigned the essay from Harper's, Tense Present, right? So all about kind of language and its usage. And
the American usage. Yeah.
And I just remember this moment. I was sitting in the school library. I was in this big comfy chair. The sun was coming in. And I pulled out this article to start reading it. And just immediately reading through it, the footnotes, I'd never encountered anything like that before. And I just, I thought it was hard, but also hilarious. And, I just felt like it was really special. Like I knew that Wallace was really special. And I had made kind of a mental note that I needed to read more.
Cool.
Yeah, I think the voice of that piece is really funny, and it's really him. And I read a funny thing about that piece, that he told his editor there, Colin Harrison, who Colin is the one who had sent him to the state fair and then to the cruise ship. And after that, he told Colin, don't send me anywhere else. He said, I will do another piece for you, but I'm not going to travel. So he was able to sort of do this dictionary piece, so he wrote the piece like just at home, no travel.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like the perfect scenario for him.
Yeah, the agoraphobic scholar. So Jenni, from that essay, American Usage, where did you go in your Wallace journey after that? Was it Infinite Jest the next thing, or?
Yeah, so, it was around, obviously, 2008, when we got the word that Wallace died, and it was kind of a strange feeling because, at that time I hadn't read a lot of Wallace's work, but I was right. carrying around that feeling that he was this really special writer, and, even though I hadn't read a lot of his works at that time, I kind of had this sense that there was this great loss, that there was this, and so kind of, I kind of tucked that in the back of my head, and fast forward then to summer of 2009. And I think like a lot of folks, I read Infinite Jest kind of during the Infinite Summer Initiative.
Right. Cool.
And, I think like a lot of people who really respond more viscerally to Wallace, I've always kind of been a little bit of a lonely soul, I would say. And particularly like at this time, I had just moved down to the DC area. So I was in a new city, I had a new job, I knew nobody. And I had just left academia. And so all of a sudden I had all of this free time and I had no idea what people did with their free time.
Right. It's novel concept.
Exactly. So, I would come home at the end of the day and think, what am I going to do with myself? So, the Infinite Summer was really well timed. For me, it was one of those kind of magical instances of reading the right book at the right time. So not only was it, topical to kind of, the loneliness that I was going through at that period, but, it actually gave me something to do and a sense of community to feel like I was connected with.
Yeah, I think thematically projects like Infinite Summer and now Infinite Winter marry the themes of Infinite Jest, like community and loneliness, really well with the kind of experience that you get with reading this book with hundreds of other people and getting to talk about it. Like you're all solitarily reading it, so there's that feeling of atomization, but then also there's this collective consciousness that comes with it that you get to come together and discuss it. And I think that's so much about what Infinite Jest is on about.
Yeah, and just having kicked off Infinite Winter and reading some of the intro posts that Mark has been posting, over the last couple weeks, I've been kind of smiling to myself as I've gone along because, I had it in my head. I was going to write this great intro essay about loneliness and how, I was so alone and, Wallace was the right book at the right time. And then like every single person who wrote a blog post was writing about the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's funny. There's been a lot of confluence between what people have been saying in the starting out stuff so far. Hey? Yeah. Matt Booker just posted about a week ago on tips or guidelines for reading Infinite Jest. Matt, do you want to give us a summary of what you had to say there?
Well, I feel like I have written the same kind of post about 3 or 4, 5, 6 times. So my advice is pretty limited. I feel like and I told Mark this too, like maybe I'm not the best person to ask about how to read Infinite Jest for the first time because it's been almost 20 years ago for me. And I've been rereading the book almost constantly ever since. And so for me, it's sort of a different approach. And I now in my old age, I tend to dip in and dip out of the book more than anything rather than reading it straight through in a reread.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm really surprised, not surprised, but like I'm really still just amazed at the amount of interest and like love people have for this community and like Infinite Summer and like the group read thing because it doesn't work well with a lot of other books,
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. What about you, Dave? What advice do you have for first-time readers?
For the first-time readers? I think Matt covered it pretty well in his post, so if you haven't seen that yet, check it out. I like the idea that Infinite Jest feels like a tennis match physically, and that you're flipping back and forth between the main body of the text and then the endnotes. And so the idea of 2 bookmarks is like the first essential piece of information that I give to people when they say they're going to read it. I just say, okay, get 2 bookmarks. Seriously, like it's going to help you a lot. So that's a practical thing. Another thing that I would say, and I think I'm going to be writing a post about this for the Infinite Winter site in the next week here, is that generally, like I know a lot of people, a lot of friends, family members who I've been so excited about this book and telling them about it that they've picked it up, they've started reading it, but not that many of them have got past like page 200 or 300, and they kind of abandon ship. And so my post is going to be about how the first 200 or 300 pages are pretty hard because like the chronology is weird. You don't really get a lot of context always. It's kind of a book that really rewards rereading. And so if you can make it to sort of the quarter-way mark, something happens there. You turn a corner that kind of is very illuminating and will kind of set the light bulb on for you. So I just try and encourage people to get to that point. And then after that, I think it's all mostly downhill. So those are my starting suggestions, I think, is hang in, at least until that point, and then you'll probably be good after that.
Yeah, I like to have a motto that says, like, you get what you get and you don't get upset, which is kind of a subversion of that phrase. But, I think so often readers read for plot, and if they feel like they're not getting something, that's very distressing and very chaotic. And, particularly with Infinite Jest, just because of its scope and magnitude, I mean, I agree. I think you just have to plow through, pick up what you can pick up. And something that I encourage people to do is something similar to Corey's approach, where she's like looking for color, like pick out something that you are going to pay attention to, right? Like whether it's color, descriptions of faces, the sky, whatever, and make that one of your focal points as well. Because I think kind of finding that and discovering that through the book is a nice supplemental process to this kind of traditional plot-based type of reading that we're used to doing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. On the second time reading it, I'm writing my thesis on religion and theology in relation to Infinite Jest, and so I was like doing that very thing, looking for any kind of religious references or spirituality references, and it really helped me to focus and engage with the text in a way that I hadn't necessarily done the first time I read it. So yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. Thanks, Corey, for that.
You mean Jenni?
Well, Corey and now also Jenni. Yeah.
Well, both of you, thank you I think it's great advice because I am doing something similar this time around. For me, I had to find a different tack to keep me interested in the book. And this time around, I'm reading it with this guy, Rob Short, and Rob and I are really just looking at the AA stuff. And, cool. There's a lot in there about a higher power. And that kind of goes back to what you're saying about the religion angle, because AA meets you right at the front and says, hey, we don't believe in God either. We know you're agnostic, I'm agnostic. You still need to believe in this higher power for AA to work. Right. And I think that was probably disarming to Wallace, to right up front, to have someone meet him where he was. And he was this smart guy who was not, didn't grow up in a environment full of people going to church and going to AA meetings and really understand what that was. So I think it would have been easy for him to just look down on it. So anyways, that's my angle this time. And I remember maybe one of the first times I read the book, I got really interested in masks and any mentions of masks. And I think what got me interested in that was the first mention of Gately and how digging up the head in a mask. Right. That's a spoiler alert, by the way. But
it's only on like page 12, so it's not that bad. But yeah, it's John Wayne wearing a mask.
Yeah, so I mean, the other thing with spoilers is the movie has been out for 20 years. I mean, the book has been out for 20 years.
I was like, what? There's a movie?
But
Michael Schur.
But like, if a movie came out 20 years ago, like, can I spoil The Godfather for you and like tell you how that ends?
You could. Good. I've actually never seen The Godfather.
Oh, it came out 40 years ago. I mean,
yeah, me neither, Dave. It's okay.
Oh yeah.
Well, I won't tell you how it ends.
Yeah, dude, I'd be pissed
if I remember The Godfather. But I mean, it's like I don't think you can really spoil Infinite Jest. Like, there's nothing I could tell you that be like, oh, you gave away the ending. Like, no, you could.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
But I mean, it's been 20 years. Like, for God's sake, can we just please assume like large sections of the population have read it by now? You know.
Yeah, I feel like it's more like it's less about like plot spoilers and it's more the connections, right? I mean, people want to feel smart and like figure it out themselves and kind of connect what happened, on page 30 with what happens on page 600. And, I think with, the quote unquote spoilers, you like take that joy away from them a little bit.
Right. Yeah. I liken reading this book to assembling a puzzle. And so you're getting all these like random pieces handed to you by someone who's kind of like maybe a madman, but like a really smart madman. And they're just giving you these seemingly random pieces, and you're trying to figure out a way that they connect, and they just don't for so long. But then eventually they kind of start to. And I think that's where a huge amount of the joy and the pleasure of reading this book comes from is making those connection points.
I agree, and I don't think Michael Peach liked that part. If you read the correspondence between the two, they really fought about that.
Oh yeah, makes editing a really tough job.
Because he wants to know what happens, right? And Wallace doesn't ever give him a satisfying answer. But I don't envy you guys, and I guess that's why I didn't sign up for like a traditional reread of Infinite Jest. Is like even that doesn't interest me as much anymore. Like the plot stuff. Right. I don't know. I don't think that, it's necessarily solvable or even as interesting to say like, oh yeah, that theory, that's it. So I guess for me, like, that's why I've got to come up with some other angle to keep me in the book after, like I say, like 20 years of reading this book.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Jenni, your project, you said it'd take you another 10 years. You might have to, even after another 20 years, like you might have to find another project where you're like, I got to come up with another 10-year project now to keep me interested in it.
Well, that's funny because I'm already thinking about what I'm going to do as I reread it this time. And I think what I've landed on is tracking like weather references. So, things about the weather and the sun and clouds and whether it's hot or cold. And my boyfriend happens to be a programmer, and really kind of good with the technical side. So we've already kind of plotted, how we might do a data visualization of temperatures as you progress through the book. Cool. And if what, sections are more hot or more cold and kind of how that reflects, what's going on. So. Oh,
yeah. I love the parts about Orin and Arizona and just the way he describes the sun as a hammer.
Exactly.
It's one of the phrases that I just love that.
So Jenni, you said you're rereading it in addition to the Erasing Infinite. How do you treat that read that's like one page at a time versus what you're doing now for Infinite Winter?
I would say those are very, very different experiences. It's very bizarre reading a book like one page at a time, particularly, when you might only read like 1 or 2 pages a week. And a lot of times, honestly, I'm trying not to read the page because, I'm trying to like not have what's actually going on in the book in my head. So I'm trying to kind of do the thing where you like squint a little bit so you're not reading it word for word and just trying to like pick up, the most interesting phrases. And, it doesn't always work. But yeah, so it's very different. So even though I've, been reading, I guess you can say the first quarter of the book over the last couple of years, really kind of sitting down to reread it with, the intentionality and the way you properly read a book with Infinite Winter, it's a different experience. One that I'm actually really looking forward to.
More of a fun read in a way.
Exactly. And, now that I've kind of made it through the first slog of, what the heck is going on here, I can actually do more of that connective work and kind of see some of the underpinnings that aren't as obvious, when you're a first-time reader.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I wanted to ask you too, Jenni, about the musical project that has come out of the Erasing Infinite. Can you talk a little bit about that music project?
Sure. So, I had been posting, these pieces online for some time, and Probably about, I would say half a year ago, this composer, his name is Patrick Green, he came across the project for the first time. And, it was one of those things where he left me a message with, lots of exclamation points saying, how did I not know about this until now? This is really great. And fates kind of aligned, and he has collaborated with other writers before. He has done some compositions with the poet W.S. DiPiero. And so he had a commission to create some sort of project, some sort of song cycle that was going to debut in Chicago this year. And timing just aligned right at the time that he was kind of looking for an idea and looking for inspiration. He came upon this project and really resonated kind of, with these pieces. So he's calling this, I sent him an email today and I said, tell me what you think so that I can talk about this correctly. And he says he thinks of it as kind of a postmodern imagining of a postmodern book. So how it's working is he is taking pieces from the poems and weaving them into lyrics. So the song cycle will be for a soprano who, ironically, her name is Joelle, which, you can...
Madame Psychosis.
Exactly. You couldn't ask for any more alignment there. So it's with Joelle is going to be our soprano singer, accompanied by piano for the first debut. And
the guy's name's Mario, the pianist.
Yeah, exactly. We need to kind of align these worlds a little bit more.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anybody who speaks German is going to kill me as I totally mispronounced this word here. But he says it follows this old format called Frauenliebe und Leben, which is, in English, it means like a woman's love and life. So it kind of follows the theme of like a woman falling in love, losing the one that she loves, and then kind of reflecting back on her life. So I have not heard this yet, so I have no idea, what it's actually going to sound like. But, really excited about that. And just kind of this idea that like art begetting art and, kind of Wallace is like living on through these different strains. It's great.
Yeah, and in lots of different artistic formats too. So like we talked about Brad Cheeseman and his Infinite Jest Music jazz album, and now this, and then so many other forms of art that are kind of propagating outwards from literature. It's really cool to see that kind of diversity. Yeah,
I feel like we need a David Foster Wallace like jam concert or something, where everybody who's created musical works inspired by Infinite Jest or the other books can kind of do a big performance.
Yeah, we can get the Mountain Goats and Marnie Stern to come out
the Decemberists, right?
The Decemberists could join, of course, yeah.
There's another group called Blamos that did a song called Living with David Foster Wallace. I like that song a lot.
Huh.
Oh, yeah.
Blamos. I also saw an avant-garde music theater piece based on a David Foster Wallace work in New York in 2004. And it was based on the story from Brief Interviews with Hideous Men called Tristan, I Sold Sissy Nar to Echo.
Okay.
You're going to have to refresh me on that one. It's been a while.
It's a really bizarre story. A lot of people don't like it. But it's set in Hollywood, and it's kind of about a TV producer, but it's also like this metaphor for Orpheus, and I think it's Orpheus and Narcissus. And so there's like this weird mythology element, and they turned it into an opera, but it was like a modern avant-garde opera. It was at the Kaufman Theater in New York in 2004, so you'd have to invite those people as well to your jam. So that's very exciting, Jenni. I wonder if you see any other collaborations that you would like to have happen with this project. Have you talked to any other poets about like contributing pages to it, or is it you really feel like it's your baby, like you have ownership of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's tough. I certainly feel like this particular project is my baby. But I mean, I'm completely open to any collaborations that may come my way. And I did hear Corey's shout out in her podcast about wanting to do a show. And Corey, I would love to do a show with you. So if you can make that happen.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah. Well, the Great Concavity will curate some kind of like artistic festival, maybe with music and all of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be fun. What is your exact level of involvement with Patrick Green's project? So he's weaving your poetry into his lyrics. Are you kind of consulting on that, or what level of involvement will you have with that process?
So he's pretty much running that show. Right now he is in the composing process. So I don't know that there's a lot to share out. I imagine I'll get to listen to it and, provide probably limited feedback at that point. He has extended some offers and said, if there's a poem that you really love and that you want to make sure it gets in the song, just, let me know. But I also respect his creative process and his vision. So I'm sure whatever he creates will be great. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, for those who are attending the David Foster Wallace conference this year, we've actually been collaborating with those conference coordinators. And so we should be doing a performance and a discussion panel. I believe it's Thursday night of the conference.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So yeah,
cool.
if you're listening and planning on coming to that conference, would love to see you there.
Absolutely. You were there the first annual conference, Jenni, is that right? But not last year?
Right. Yep. So I went the first annual conference and presented as part of a panel just on the Erasing Infinite project. There I got to meet Ryan Blank, who's also one of our Infinite Winter guides. And, really nice to kind of put all the faces to the names and meet these people in person.
We met briefly too. And Jenni, I met you there, Jenni, briefly.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. I do remember that.
I actually emailed Ryan, I don't know how many years ago, maybe like 3 or so, because I saw his book, Supposedly Fun Things, somewhere online. And then kind of like looked into him a bit and then sent him an email. And it turns out we had a bunch of stuff in common. And so we went back and forth in email just for quite a while, actually, before I started seeing him pop up on other places like this related to this community. So that's kind of a cool connection point.
And Jenni, we had mentioned you now on a previous podcast where we talked about the issue of the Found Poetry Review that was about David Foster Wallace, and I contributed a little poem in there. I had a ton of fun doing that. Do you want to talk about how that issue came together and what some of the other pieces were in there?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I think at the beginning of the podcast, I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of the Found Poetry Review, which got started back in 2011. And, one of the wonderful things about being an editor-in-chief is that you can curate, special issues that align to your personal interests. So, as I was kind of looking at the year ahead, back, I think it would have been 2013, we realized, that the 5th anniversary of Wallace's passing was coming up, and thought that would be a great opportunity to do a tribute issue for him. And, the submissions that we got were actually, really amazing. So I'm going to contrast this a little bit to an issue that we have right now. So right now we're collecting submissions for an issue about David Bowie.
Oh, yeah.
And cool. What we're finding as we read these submissions is that it's still too new, right? Like, people haven't really had a chance to kind of reflect and absorb. And, the pieces they're submitting really show that. Whereas when we did the David Foster Wallace issue, it had been 5 years. People had kind of lived with this and thought about this.
Yeah, the stages of grief had occurred.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, we got a lot of really great submissions, including from Matt. And,
that was funny.
Attaboy.
And
I had a lot of fun. Just like, I thought it was a great idea because Wallace has so much text,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the cool things about that issue as well was we worked with Francesco Lovato, who is the director of the Chicago School of Poetics, and he actually teaches at Illinois State University.
Oh, yeah,
so
cool.
He was able to kind of curate a special selection of poems written by current students at that school. So that was also really meaningful and kind of a unique take.
Oh, that's awesome. Did he work there when Wallace did at the same time, or did he come after?
He seems pretty young, so I think he must have come after, but I can't say for sure.
Yeah. What year did Wallace teach there at ISU till, Matt? Do you remember?
Well, his last year there was in 2001 to 2002. He moved to California in 2002.
Right. Cool.
And I think he actually got that job in 2000 and gave like 2 years notice because he had still got some leave time signed up. So with academic jobs, you have to often finish out your year, but he gave advance of like a whole nother year, which is kind of unique.
Just so fiercely loyal, kind of, in a way.
So fiercely loyal, and I think he also wanted to tie up a lot of loose ends and take his time with moving and the dogs and everything. He was really reluctant to upset their lives, I think. Anyways, Jenni, the Infinite Winter project that's now, how do you see yourself going through the book this time around? You mentioned some other things you're looking for. What are you most looking forward to reading this time around, parts wise, in Infinite Jest?
So I think like as I absorb pop culture and watch TV shows, I'm always kind of a fan of the slightly evil characters who may or may not be redeemed at the end, So like in Harry Potter, I'm a big Snape fan, Lost, like I'm a big Ben Linus fan in Lost. And, I think here, I like the characters of like Pemulus and, even Oren to a certain extent, who do some, pretty despicable things. But
there's a lot of that.
But I like particularly with the Pemulus passages that he's portrayed in a lot of ways as kind of being the quote unquote Antichrist, if you want to use that word for it. I think that was Wallace's word, not my word, right? Yeah. But you have these really kind of tender passages, even at the beginning, right, where they're at the tennis tournament and they're talking about how everybody has all this like sponsored gear, and tennis rackets and stuff, from these companies and
all the sticks,
right, and how Michael Pemulus is the only one, right, who doesn't have that, but they get him to spray paint the logo on. Right. And just, it's funny, but it's also kind of like touching and tender, right? This character who's made to be so bad in a lot of ways has a sensitive underbelly, I guess.
Yeah, he's just so human as well. So, I've come to realize lately that I'm physically incapable of not smiling when someone says Pemulus. I just have to smile every time because I think his character's so funny and interesting.
His entrepot yachting cap. I love that part.
Yeah, the Peemster.
Yeah, and his character just lends itself so well to art, right? I mean, people have done these drawings of him, which are just, hilarious.
Yeah. I remember seeing like a fashion magazine some years ago too that like had some characters from Infinite Jest recreated in like with real human models, and one of them was like Pemulus, and he had the cap and everything like that.
Yeah, there's a guy who has an Infinite Jest tattoo that has like realistic drawings of Hal
I've seen that.
And Pemulus.
Right.
Yeah. So Dave, what about you? Matt has said kind of what he's looking for. What are you going to be paying attention to?
Okay, this time rereading Infinite Jest. I immediately, the first time I read it, I was so drawn to especially the passages about advertising, and most notably the one about the tongue scrapers, the no coat ink tongue scraper ad with the guy who's offered the lick of the coquettish meter maid's ice cream, and then the geologic layer of film on his tongue and everyone recoiling in abject horror and all that. I thought that was probably the funniest part of Infinite Jest, and sometimes I just pick it up and I reread that section just to laugh. So I think I'm interested in seeing this time the comedic way that he deals with advertising. But then also he contrasts that so well with, like, there's that specific line where he says the point of these ads was to create anxieties relievable by purchase. And I think that's obviously a major theme of Infinite Jest. So consumerism is something that I'll be paying attention to. Also, as a Canadian, I love the whole Canadian arc in this book. And it's so weird to me that an American author is so interested and so up on Canadian politics and history and concerns. And so that's something that I'm always just have a great deal of fun engaging with when I read this book.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. What is your take on that, Jenni? Or what do you guys think about that part of it? Because You know, you got the tennis part of the book, you've got the AA part of the book, and then you've got this like Quebecois terrorists. Like
I love it. I think it's so funny. Like the whole history of the Prochain du Train. Its footnote just wrecks me. Like I find it so funny because in Canada, like we kind of view Quebec, or Westerners or Anglophones view Quebec as kind of its own cultural thing for sure historically, and even to present they've maintained a really distinct and vibrant sense of history and culture and language and all that kind of stuff. And so to see Wallace, an American, writing about sort of his take on the uniqueness of Quebec is so funny. And then also the parts about Alberta are just the best, because there's also a sort of a sense in Canada among many non-Albertans that Alberta is like the most sort of capitalist of the provinces because of, you know, the oil sands are there. And so there's all this like insane economic stuff happening in northern Alberta. And it tends to lead to some funny cultural things. Like a lot of Albertans come to my city, Kelowna, in the summers with these just like monstrous trucks and ridiculous kind of cultural affectations that come along with that. It's like beach partying and, you know, like insane music festivals. There's this music festival that happens every year here called Center of Gravity that's just like mostly Albertans just partying in the streets, and it's just absolute like havoc and like Dionysian revelry basically. So the stuff about Albertans in Infinite Jest is so funny to me.
Wait, where does he mention Alberta?
He mentions the ultra conservative wacko Albertans, who are another sect of terrorists within Canada. They have different methodologies and concerns than the Quebecois terrorists, but they're also they're so obsessed with Canadian sovereignty as well that they do some terroristic kind of moves. Nothing quite as on the scale. They're not quite obviously at the forefront as the Quebecois ones, but there's a few references in there to them, so maybe watch out for those this time. They're quite funny.
You better blog about this, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will. I'll make my posts all Canadian centric and illuminate some Canadian cultural things for the Americans. In the diagnostics for this podcast, it says that 76% of listeners are American, so maybe I can help to, inform.
Yeah, I would count myself among those who need to be informed. I think, like, as I think back upon that first reading, that was one of the sections that was like really tough. It was really tough.
Oh, I can imagine, totally. There was at the Paris conference last year, there was a guy a scholar from Alberta, who gave a talk on the Canadian-centric arc of Infinite Jest. And I'm not sure how much interest there was from non-Canadians. Like, people were engaged, but there's something special about it being a Canadian and reading those parts of the book that I just don't know if Americans or people from other countries can quite appreciate to the same extent. So I can imagine those being confusing and a bit bewildering, maybe. Like Wallace makes references to the FLQ, which was actually like a real terrorist sect in the 1960s and 70s. And so like he's definitely done his homework on Canadian history and politics. So it's quite interesting to see that. There was that reference in Every Love Story is a Ghost Story that Wallace at one time was considering just moving to Canada and being a high school teacher. And that's what my life is. I teach high school in Canada. So that was really funny to me as well.
That's funny. Hey, Jenni, I have one other question for you about reading Infinite Jest as part of your Erasing Infinite project. You were talking about how you scan a page and you look at it and you kind of squint to try to really not read it, but to look at just the language. What are some memories you have or experiences you've had of something that you remember just really jumping out at you and saying, this is going to be the poem on this page? Is it just like big words or long words, or is it something really moving phrase? What is it that jumps out at you first?
I would say it's a combination of all of those things, right? Every page is different. Two instances I can think of particularly have more to do with just patterns in the language than they do, particular words. We have that great section of the book where everything starts with, this is how, right? This is how you do that. This is how. And so I've transferred that into, a series of poems that start kind of with that same lead-in phrase. The other one I did most recently, which, I thought was pretty funny, was, we get to the chapter where they're talking about John Wayne a lot. So, I've turned those into a little mini series of poems about John Wayne, the cowboy.
Oh, that's great. I love John Wayne. I think he's one of my favorite characters. He lacks like a certain kind of depth that most other characters in the book have, but there's something so like the way that he's so flat in his personality I find so funny. He's just so like robotic,
Well, I think it was a brilliant thing for him to name that character John Wayne, because there's actually like thousands of people in the United States named John Wayne. And in that way, he apparently did know a guy named John Wayne, he came across a guy named John Wayne when he was a tennis player. And there's no way that guy can go back and sue him like Kate Gompert can. It would be like naming a character like John Smith. Be like, you didn't name. I named it after a different John Wayne.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But
picking someone famous was
But Matt, I mean, to your point as well, one of the challenges is that Wallace has these elegant turns of phrases, these word Frankensteins where he's creating his own new words, right? And I think it's really easy to gravitate towards those and want to use those. But that's an instance where, as I'm writing, I need to kind of push back, because if too much of that creeps into the poems, it becomes easy for people to say, "Well, you're just ripping off Wallace, right? Those are his words. You're not doing anything different." So,
that's interesting.
Another question I had for you along that same line is, whenever I look at the contributors like to that David Foster Wallace issue of the Found Poetry Review, or when I see people who are commenting on your poems on Erasing Infinite, I realize I don't know like any of these poets, and I know a lot of the people in the Dave Foster Wallace community. You see a lot of the same names, and I think your project has really brought in like a new crowd of people to Wallace's work who would maybe not approach it the way that most people would. What I was going to ask you is what are some other poets who work like this, who are working now, or some other projects that are similar to this that you find inspiring? Like, give us some recommendations.
Yeah, there's a whole list of them. One of the big poets who's actually Canadian, Dave, who's operating right now, is his name is Christian Book.
He's great. He's amazing. I've used some of his stuff in my English classes before. He's been to Kelowna before.
I'm going to have to interrupt and say I don't like him because he blocked me on Twitter.
Oh, no. Why?
I didn't know you could even do that. You can block people?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
what did you do to him?
I guess I am just at war with certain Canadian poets.
Oh, no.
Are you threatening Canadian sovereignty? Is that what?
You guys can talk about him, but I'm out.
Okay. Well, so I mean, if you're into this kind of poetry, I think he is definitely one to look at. He does more constraint-based work.
Sounds.
Right. Yeah. So his book Eunoia. Right.
Amazing.
Each chapter,
So
the first chapter contains only words containing A. The second chapter is only words containing E. And I mean, just the fortitude and patience that it takes to do a project like that is impressive.
Yeah. Wasn't it like a 10-year project for him to make that book?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really impressive.
Yeah, and then you have some other people who are kind of erasing pop culture documents. So Travis McDonald erased the 9/11 commission report and turned that into something called the Omission Repo. There's a whole slew of them. I'm trying to think one more. Maybe Ronald Johnson has something called Radios, where he erased Paradise Lost. So, I mean, there's a whole canon of people who are doing this kind of work.
Oh, I was thinking of Austin Kleon and the newspaper poems and stuff like that. Have you seen that Blackout newspaper Blackout or whatever? Do you know that project, Austin Kleon?
Yeah, I do. So it's very much in the same spirit. Yeah.
Well, that sounds great.
Cool.
I'm looking forward to following your whole project because, like you say, it doesn't take very long for a person to read these. It probably takes you 10 times as long to create them. But they're
Oh yeah, probably like hundreds of times.
Yeah.
More.
well, and what it's done is made it a lot more. It's made the book sort of accessible. Like it's not intimidating to look at one of these and to read it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting the way you sort of transformed it into a minimalistic thing. No one would ever call like Infinite Jest a minimalistic piece, right?
Right.
Yeah. I actually had that exact word in my sort of notes right here, that your project, Jenni, is turning Wallace's maximalism into like a minimalization process. I think that's really interesting. Good synergy, Matt. Good synergy. Well, I think we're sort of getting to that time. So, Jenni, do you have any sort of final thoughts on anything we've talked about here today?
Yeah,
Anything to add? Final poems?
no final poems. You can go online and read those, I think. But, you know, what really strikes me from this conversation, you know, from listening to your guys' past podcasts and even just watching some of the commentary that people are writing online is, you know, there's really at least two camps that come to Wallace, right? There's the academics who have kind of the cold type of approach, and you have the people who are, you know, really connecting to it, you know, in their heart, I would say.
Right. And
I would just encourage people who are looking at the book, particularly for the first time, you know, to just go with what feels right to you. You know, some people are going to really connect to it on that kind of academic scholarly level, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Some people are going to kind of find those personal touch points and references and really, you know, kind of get that personal meaning out of it. And that's great too. Yeah. So there's no right way to read it.
Yeah. And I'd say too that those two things are not also mutually exclusive. So you can be an academic approaching this book and really appreciating, you know, sort of the critical stuff that he's doing with it, but at the same time also engaging with the affective nature of the book. And I think that's such a great marriage throughout this book, is those two things. The head and the heart kind of find connecting points. Yeah,
that's a good clarification. All the academics were probably scowling that I called them cold, so didn't mean that.
the dispassionate objectivity of higher learning.
I hate that.
Yeah, it's funny. You know, I read Infinite Jest when I was doing my education degree, and then years later, after teaching for a bunch of years, decided to go back to do a master's in English because I wanted to do something about Infinite Jest. Like, I'd fallen so in love with this book that I just knew I needed to do something big with it, or bigger with it, and so there's I kind of had the experience of both things. Being a fan and then coming to it academically because of my, you know, fandom.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Awesome, Jenni. Well, we're very looking forward to your upcoming posts on the Infinite Winter blog project. You're going to be posting about once a week.
Yep.
I'll be posting once a week as well. We've go check out Matt's post from last week, sort of his guide to reading Infinite Jest. Jenni, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome talking to you and about your project.
Thanks, Jenni. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
You're welcome. So Jenni, where can people go find your work online?
Sure. To follow the Erasing Infinite project, you can just go to www.erasinginfinite.com. Or if you kind of want to stalk me personally, I'm at Jenni, JenniBbaker.com.
Cool. And you're at Twitter too? You're on Twitter doing the tweets?
Exactly, yeah. So on Twitter, I'm just at Jenni B. Baker.
Cool. And then so the Infinite Winter project, Jenni, you're kind of also doing some PR stuff for that, I guess. Where can people go to find out more about the Infinite Winter project?
Sure. Yeah, to find out more about the Infinite Winter project, you can go to the main website, which is www.infinitewinter.org. On Twitter, we are at EnitHouse, so at EnitHouse. And on Facebook, we are /Year of Glad. From there, you can kind of connect into our other properties. We're on Reddit as well. So big online community.
Just tentacles everywhere, you know, like every social media thing. It's Infinite Winter's you getting ubiquitous.
I'll put in a plug for the group read or the co-read Rob and I are going to be blogging about is on my blog at simpleranger.net.
Perfect.
Oh, awesome. I didn't know about that. I love Rob Short. That is a cool dude. Him and I were on the same panel at the conference.
Go check it out on simpleranger.net. We have a couple posts up there already.
Great. Matt, for some reason, I don't know why, I've kind of fallen into doing like the end of show stuff that's really boring. And so, Matt, tell us about the things that people can do to get in touch with us.
They can tweet at us. We're at Concavity Show. They can email us We are concavityshow@gmail.com. And you can visit our website, greatconcavity.podbean.com.
Yeah. And Instagram, too. We're there.
Oh, Instagram, we are also at Concavity Show. I think that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
We also want to thank our logo, which is courtesy of the artist Robin O'Neill. We also want to thank Parquet Courts for their song Instant Disassembly. What else, Dave?
Totally. We got an email today, Matt, from somebody who wrote in with some questions. So we're doing an upcoming show this month where we field questions from the audience, from the people listening. And he specifically mentioned, thank you so much for introducing me to the band Parquet Courts. I didn't know about them before, and I've gotten really into them as a result of the podcast. So that's cool. Love hearing stuff like that.
Very cool.
Yeah. And so, to everyone listening, please continue sending us questions through email or Twitter. We've been stockpiling a list of them on a document, and so look forward to that episode in the coming week or so.
Couple weeks.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's all the things. So thanks again, Jenni. Thanks, Matt. Great talking to you guys.
Until next time.
Shield my eyes.